Back when I was a kid, there was two things I loved more than life itself, and those things were Pokemon and wrestling. The two things are just sense memory together in my mind, and I'd often play my Game Boy Color with wrestling on in the background. I got into wrestling as a child with the WCW, which I used to watch around my grandparents' house because we were way too poor to have cable. These were the days when wrestling was on Cartoon Network after hours, which would seem a bit crazy now. I watched the WCW until it shut down, which was when I begrudgingly switched over to the at the time WWF. And this was of course during the incredible Attitude Era of WWF, with me absolutely loving The Rock, Steve Austin and Mankind. I used to always watch wrestling with my granddad and he thought it was stupid but enjoyed every second of the lunacy. I remember him cry laughing when Stone Cold took away Triple H in an ambulance in one match. He did used to say it was a little bit suspect though.
Mister, you better take your gay porn and walk right out of this bar.
And of course, with the massive popularity of wrestling at the time, video games were soon released in the hundreds. My first one being WCW vs NWO Revenge for the N64, and I just have so many happy memories playing this game with my brother and his mates. The N64 also had WWF games in No Mercy and WrestleMania that were also amazing and made by the same people. On the PS1 you of course had the SmackDown series, which was a little bit different but good in its own right, and it went on to the PS2 generation, where we got tons of these games, and I would really like to do a video about the whole SmackDown series at some point. But much like in the previous generation, the Nintendo system, the Gamecube, got its own wrestling game series. And I had all these games growing up and adored them all to differing degrees. I was a bit of a Gamecube kid. So let's take a look at these games based on soap operas for hillbillies and people who wear tap-out clothing.
Oh man, they took your job?
The first game in the Gamecube series of WWE games is WrestleMania 18, and this series of sorts doesn't get off to the best of starts. The weird thing is, I remember actually thinking this game wasn't all that bad, but it's actually worse than I remember. The first thing you might notice is the game looks absolutely terrible for the Gamecube. Everything looks stiff and glitchy. And don't get me started on the fact that this game forces my emulator into stretched mode for the matches for some reason, which actually ended up being the case for all of these games. But a perfect example of this game's cheap feel is this Steve Austin win animation where he downs a beer but there's no beer coming out of the can, it's just air.
No, I'm serious. I'm about to haul ass if y'all have no better shit than this to drink.
The cheap rushed feel continues over into the gameplay, which is just clunky as all hell. There's no heavy grapples or heavy punches, it's just all one button for each. You of course have the usual two different types of reversals, but again it just doesn't feel like it works correctly. I mean, the games on the N64 had far more advanced fighting systems and felt better to play than this one. Take for example the process of picking up a weapon, which should be a simple task, but in this game it isn't. You have to hit two buttons together and it just only ever seems to work when it feels like it. And that's how literally everything feels in this game. It's just like a fussy child that only wants to eat chicken nuggets. But it gets even more annoying when you add in more than two wrestlers to a match, because if you're touched by another wrestler's move, it can hit you. Sure, the selection of wrestlers is actually pretty decent, but when the game sucks this much, you won't want to play as any of them anyway. And it isn't enough that the gameplay sucks in this game, there isn't actually that much single player content to play. You can play the Path of a Champion mode, which is literally just a series of arbitrary matches towards getting a title belt with no story. You know you've got problems when a PS1 game has a better and more advanced story mode than your next gen game. However, this game does get points, mainly because William Regal and Tajiri are in this game and I love both of them. What self-respecting Englishman would I be if I didn't play as William Regal whenever the chance presents itself?
Now get out of here, you po-faced pillock, and take this disgusting trollop with you. Go on, bugger off!
There is an exhibition mode where you can do multiplayer stuff, which will likely be the only enjoyment you get out of this game. It has all your standard stuff like hardcore matches, cage matches and ladder matches that with the weapon controls are about as much fun as shoving a cactus up your ass. They do have my childhood favourite wrestling event, the Royal Rumble, that also just kinda sucks. So WrestleMania 18 amounts to a rushed, ugly, clunky mess that I have no desire to play in the modern era.
The game is not fun.
A mere year later, the second game and last game in this sort of mini-series, WrestleMania 19, was released, and it's a massive improvement on the first game. Everything feels just so much more responsive and smooth in this game, and it doesn't have the rush feel of the first game. The general gameplay is improved greatly, with them actually adding in heavy hits and grapples that were absent from WrestleMania 18. And all the simple stuff like picking up weapons has been fixed here, and it isn't a pain in the arse to do. Everything else is still the same. You have your counters, and you can still hit people who are in the impact area of your move, but it's more streamlined. Even the graphics are a huge step up, with them not looking like they stepped out of a PS1 wrestling game. But this Stacy Keibler at the shop menu still kinda creeps me out.
Go earn some more cash and come see me again.
Filthy, disgusting scrubber. Why didn't you cover that up? You'll get a bloody draft in there and get you moaning.
You have exactly the same match types as the first game and the roster hasn't changed all that much. And all these little changes add up to the game actually being enjoyable to play, and I had a really good time recording the gameplay footage for this. I actually played a lot of this game on family trips to Scotland with a portable Gamecube screen I had at the time. But unlike the first game, this one actually has some sort of single player story mode in it, which is a big step up. And the mode is called Revenge, and it might honestly be the funniest thing about this game because it's ridiculous. The grand tale begins with whoever you choose to play as being fired from the WWE by Vince McMahon, which is pretty on brand. And then a very poorly voice acted Stephanie McMahon offers us a deal to get revenge on Vince. See what they did there? I mean, call me crazy, but should I really be signing a contract with the daughter of the man who scorned me? Doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But anyway, against our better judgment, we signed a contract and agreed to do her dirty work of going around sabotaging the upcoming WrestleMania event. And there's 4 areas where you have to do missions to frustrate Vince's plans of having a WrestleMania, which is where this game gets kind of funny. The first set of missions has you going to a construction site where you're killing innocent builders to delay the construction of the event. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. Get fired by the WWE and go on a mad killing spree. Please Stone Cold spare me, I have a family.
Holy shit, you fucking killed her, dude!
It will never not be funny seeing Stone Cold Steve Austin mercilessly murdering construction workers in a sanctioned WWE game. It gets even weirder later on when there's missions where another wrestler will challenge you to a lobbing builders off a roof contest. What were they thinking? And this mode kind of turns the game into an old school beat 'em up style of game, which is actually kind of fun. There's 4 different locations all with their own set of missions with varying goals, like throw a certain amount of builders off a building in a time limit, or smash a bunch of security guards' heads through Vince's cars. It's fucking ridiculous. And most of them are time limit based, so it can get a little bit tricky sometimes, but having this mode is a big improvement over the first game. Overall, WrestleMania 19 is a very silly game that makes for a very entertaining time and put this series of GameCube wrestling games on a good path. Coming again a year later was the start of a new series of wrestling games on the GameCube, the Day of Reckoning series. This one right here is probably the one I have the strongest sense of nostalgia for because at the time me and my stepbrother were massive wrestling fans and would watch the WWE together every week. And during these shows we would see ads for this game constantly leading up to its release and we were hyped. I remember my stepdad knowing how bad we wanted the game, so he came home from work one day with a copy of this game for each of us. And we absolutely loved this game and played the hell out of it in multiplayer together. There was good reason for us to like this game so much because it was a considerable step up from the last game. The battle system was improved on again, and this time they added in body damage, which adds another layer of strategy to the battles. Also added in this game was a minigame of sorts that happens when you start a submission move where you have to tap the button faster than your opponent. And if you do enough damage to your opponent's body, it can make it easier for you to make them say, "I win." This game gives you a lot more feedback than the first 2 games, which makes it easier to know when to pin your opponent and when not to. And another thing that's been added on that front is there actually being stats for every wrestler on the select screen. Maybe the different wrestlers had different stats in the older games, but actually being able to see them is a lot better. And other than that, nothing major has changed in the gameplay department, but everything just feels so tight and responsive. The same old match types return, but there is a new match type that I should probably mention, even if it's a bit risque. They introduced in this game the bra and panties match, where the female wrestlers would try to rip each other's clothing off. The early 2000s, they really were a different time, weren't they?
I thought I told you to keep your hands to yourself.
But another big addition to this game was a proper story mode that sadly for my sick entertainment isn't just professional wrestlers murdering builders, which involves you using a very in-depth character creator to make an upstart wrestler that you can take to the top. And this character creator is absolutely amazing for the time, and you can go through and pick their movesets from a giant list, do their intro sequences with a built-in editor, and make absolutely ridiculous characters like the Sexader, a valiant knight in a pink thong and yellow Wellington boots.
What's wrong with being sexy?
I'm still kinda sad I didn't name him the Crusader now, that would have been a way better name. This story mode has you competing in a long series of matches that are strung together with little non-voiced cutscenes. You'll usually have a set of objectives to achieve in each match, and this and the storyline keeps it very interesting. Depending on your performance in these matches, you'll earn XP and money to use to level your character up through the course of the story. Sure, this story isn't exactly Shakespeare, it just follows the rags to riches usual sports game tropes. But I don't know what it is about this setup, I've always just been a sucker for it, it's always a fun time. You start off fighting weird no-names in the lower leagues and slowly work your way up until you're on either SmackDown or Raw. You can easily tell what's going to happen next at all times, but it's got that early 2000s wrestling charm to it. And depending on what brand you pick changes the story ever so slightly, which gives it a little bit of replay value. I didn't even need to play this game that long for this video, and I ended up just playing through and beating this whole mode because it's so goddamn good. And I would be mad at myself if I didn't quickly mention how amazing the soundtrack to this game is. It's just full of nu metal, which is glorious. It iconically starts with the classic Anthrax and Public Enemy crossover Bring the Noise, which I first heard in this game. And it also has a few Zebrahead songs, which are a band from my teenage years that I already loved at this point. Having actual bands playing in the background just made it feel more professional than the other games so far and gave it that kind of Tony Hawk's vibe. Day of Reckoning is a really cheesy game that's very of its time, but it's still an absolute joy to play now. The second and last entry in the Day of Reckoning series was released again like Clockwork a year after the release of the first game, and this is one that at the time passed me by because me and my friends were way too into the SmackDown series on PlayStation 2. But I did play this game a few years later and I did really enjoy it. In many ways it's a lot better than the first game. The gameplay has barely changed from the last entry, which is fine because if it's not broke you don't need to fix it. However, they did add in a stamina system where your wrestler gets tired and will be stuck in their tracks if the meter gets fully depleted. And to be perfectly honest, I hate this system because it just slows the game down and punishes you for winning in many ways. It reminds me of the rubber banding techniques behind stuff like the blue shell in the Mario Kart series. They also added in an option where you have to select a submission type before going into a hold with the C-stick. Each option does something different, like regaining your stamina or doing more damage towards making your opponent tap out. And stuff like this in my opinion doesn't add anything to the gameplay and just slows everything down unnecessarily. Although I don't like these changes, it doesn't matter because the core of the gameplay is already so solid. The Create a Wrestler mode hasn't really changed all that much apart from you having to unlock more stuff than you did in the first game. And they've added more stats for you to level up on these characters that can lock off your character from using certain moves. I was incredibly disappointed that the Crusader helmet was no longer available, so I couldn't make the Crusader. But I did, however, make up for this by making Abraham Lincoln, who's not as awesome but still looks stupid in the cutscenes, which is essential. The area that's gotten the most love in this entry is definitely the new story mode that actually follows up on the events from the first game. In the first cutscene you can actually see how much better this game looks. Eric Bischoff actually looks less like a They Live demon in this one. Basically, after you won the heavyweight title in the first game, you instantly lost it to Triple H, and then there's a contentious draw between him and Chris Jericho. This leads to the belt being left vacant and eventually it gets stolen and the usual WWE silly shenanigans occur. It's a little bit more interactive than the first game, with you getting to make decisions along the way that change the story just a slight bit. And I think this game has a much better story than the first one, which felt really dry and paint by the numbers. The story mode in this game actually kind of feels like the dumb melodrama you would actually get on the real show, which just ultimately makes this story mode a lot more entertaining than the first game. But they really did drop the ball with the music on this game. There's only one band in it. Where's the cheesy nu metal?
It's a valid offense, I'm offended.
It's nice that the main series of WWE games on the Gamecube had a really solid finish to it with Day of Reckoning 2. And this weird series of sorts will always have a special place in my heart because of all the time I spent in multiplayer playing this with family and friends. Anyway, I've been a Goblin and thank you for watching. If you would like to get all my videos months early and to get your name in the credits, go and support me on Patreon like all these awesome people have. Links in the description.